Hi, Assassins. I'm Brooke.
And I'm Cami.
Welcome to Bookish Realms.
We're just two girls who can't stop talking about fantasy books.
After deep diving into the Assassin's Blade with you all, we're diving into the broader world of SJM's universe, the Maasverse. If you're like us, you can't help but notice the little hints, parallels, and Easter eggs that connect this story to ACOTAR and Crescent City. Today, we'll be looking at these connections just for the Assassin's Blade, which is the prequel to Throne of Glass. Because, let's be honest, we'd be here for 10 hours if we covered the entire series at once. So, we'll be releasing one of these episodes after each book deep dive.
Because The Assassin's Blade is a prequel, there are definitely less Maasverse connections in this book than in others, so we've changed the structure of the episode. We'll go novella by novella, sharing the Maasverse connections we found in each one. In past episodes, we've found several direct/confirmed connections, but that's not the case with The Assassin's Blade. So we'll be mostly focusing on parallel language and descriptions and elements that exist across the entire Maasverse. We'll also build on some theories we've covered on previous Maasverse Connections episodes, so listen to those if you haven't already. Also, go listen to our What is the Maasverse episode, which gives you a quick overview of what the Maasverse even is. And another quick note, because this episode is releasing on March 20th, which is the first day of spring, and also the date of the Bloomsbury trading update. Bloomsbury is SJM's publisher, and there's a lot of speculation that there might be an ACOTAR 6 announcement today. We love to clown just like everyone else, so keep an eye on our socials because we'll definitely share any announcements or hints that are released today.
Before we continue, we just want to give a huge spoiler warning for all of the Maasverse. There will be spoilers for all 3 series in this episode, including the most recent book in the Crescent City series, House of Flame and Shadow.
Okay, let's start with the assassin and the pirate lord. In this novella, we learn that Rolf has a magical map tattooed on his hands. Quote, Rolf extended a hand, and Selena watched his tattooed palm and fingers as they clasped Sam's broad hand. The map, that was the mythic map that he'd sold his soul to have inked on his hands. The map of the world's oceans. The map that changed to show storms, foes, and treasure. At this point in the series, we don't get the full story on how Rolf got the map. But later, in Empire of Storms, Chapter 38, we finally do.
Rolf was 16, barely more than a slave on a ship. Because of his Mycenaean heritage, he was beaten, and all his money went back to his mother and sister. One day, his ship got caught in a storm and sank. He drifted at sea for a full day before washing up on an island, where he woke up to a man staring down at him. The man asked what Rolf wanted for himself. Rolf, desperate, said he wanted to be the pirate lord of Skulls Bay. The man agreed, but told him there would be a price. He would take what Rolf valued most. Rolf, thinking he had no wealth or belongings, agreed. When he finally made it back home, he learned that his mother and sister had been killed at sea while trying to find him. That was the real cost of his bargain. So why is this a Maasverse connection? In ACOTAR, we learned that in the Night Court, bargains are tattooed onto people permanently. These bargains are an old and powerful magic, forming a magically binding agreement that demands payment. We see this play out in multiple ways. Feyre and Rhysand, Nessa and Cassian. Sometimes both individuals get a tattoo. Other times, it only appears on one person. The magic itself decides what the tattoo looks like, and when the bargain is fulfilled, the tattoo disappears. Sounds familiar? Because Rolf's tattoo definitely fits that description. He made a bargain with an unknown sea god, got a magically binding tattoo in return, and lost the thing he valued most. Now, if only we had a better description of this sea god, we could also go full spiral mode about who exactly gave him this tattoo. But even without that, the parallels to the Night Court bargains are a little crazy.
Our next Maasverse connection in The Assassin and the Pirate Lord is a really interesting parallel description. There's a moment when Selena is walking around Skulls Bay and a breeze hits her, carrying the scent of home. Quote, slowly, Selena turned north, toward the source of the breeze, which smelled of a faraway land she hadn't seen in 8 years. Pine and snow, a city still in winter's grasp. She breathed it in, staring across the leagues of lonely black ocean, seeing, somehow, that distant city that had once, long ago, been her home. The wind ripped the strands of hair from her braid, lashing them across her face. Orinth, a city of light and music, watched over by an alabaster castle with an opal tower so bright it could be viewed for miles. So, Orinth is described as a city of light and music, and while it's not an exact match, that description feels very similar to how Valaris, the city of starlight, is portrayed in ACOTAR.
Valaris is most famous for its artist quarters, the Rainbow of Valaris, which is home to performers, musicians, dancers, and actors, a place filled with art, music, and beauty. Sounds familiar? And then there's architecture. Many of Valaris' buildings are carved from white marble. Now, white marble and alabaster, which is what the castle in Ornith is made out of, aren't the same stone, but they're both white, giving these cities another similarity. We're not saying Ornith is Belarus, but the similarities are definitely there. And with SJM, you know nothing is accidental.
Let's move on to The Assassin and the Healer, where we meet Irene, who wants to be a healer. The most obvious connection here is healers. They exist in all three Maasverse series, and their magic is always portrayed as powerful and essential. In Throne of Glass, healers train at the Torre Chesme in Antica. Healing magic isn't just about fixing wounds. It becomes a key weapon in the fight against Erewhon, Maeve, and the Valg. It's typically described as a bright white light, literally cutting through the Valg's power. In ACOTAR, we meet Madja, the Inner Circle's go-to healer. She treats a lot of their injuries. During the war, she's the one who healed Reese's wings. Later, when Farah is pregnant, she does regular checkups and can even sense the general shape of the baby inside Farah's womb. Her magic is described as sweet and cooling, but beyond that, we don't get a ton of detail on how it actually works.
Then we have Crescent City, where healers are called medwitches. Witches inherit their power, usually through the female line, from some ancient source they call the three-faced goddess, which is also mentioned in ACOTAR. But every now and then, a witch will pop up in a non-magical family. Their gifts vary. Some are seers, some are warriors, some make potions. But the most common in Lunathian, healers, working as medwitches. So across all three series, healers play a huge role, not just in fixing wounds, but in shaping the course of the story. Healing magic isn't just important, it's powerful.
And now let's get into Inish, which is described several times in this novella as covered in mist. Quote, she hated Inish, hated the reek of trash and filth, hated the heavy blanket of mist that shrouded it day and night. The mist in Inish is mentioned several times throughout the novella. In House of Flame and Shadow, Vespers reveals that mists often signal a thin place, a location where the veil between worlds is thinner, making it easier to travel between them. Every world, she suggests, has at least one of these thin places. In Prythian, these misty thin places can be found in places like the Dusk Court and the prison. In Crescent City, Bryce pinpoints several areas that are covered in mist, the Bone Quarter, the Northern Rift, and Avalon. If mists are a marker of a thin place, could Inish somehow be one of these thin places in Aurelia?
In The Assassin in the Desert, we meet Ansel, and one of the first things Selena notices about her is her armor, and more specifically, the wolves covering it. Quote, the right shoulder was fashioned into a snarling wolf's head, and her helmet, tucked into the crook of her arm, featured a wolf hunched over the nose guard. Another wolf's head had been molded into the pommel of her broad sword. Ansel confirms that the wolves are a symbol of her family, but we never get much more explanation beyond that. Fast forward to Crescent City, where we're introduced to actual wolf shifters. These shifters have both a human and wolf form, and their abilities, speed, strength, and healing, are pretty similar to what we see with the Fae. Ansel's roots tie back to the Flatlands, which used to be part of the Witch Kingdom, and as far as we know, she doesn't have a wolf form, but the wolf symbolism surrounding her is interesting, especially when you look at another wolf-themed weapon in Crescent City. Ansel carries her father's sword, which has a wolf-shaped pommel. Meanwhile, in Crescent City, Danica Fendir carries the Fendir sword, which is a family heirloom. Unfortunately, we don't get an actual description of the sword, even though multiple characters recognize it on sight, so we know there must be distinctive qualities about it. In House of Flame and Shadow, Ethan shatters the Fendir sword completely. Now, with all the timeline chaos, there's no way these two swords are the same. But the wolf connection is too interesting to ignore. Whether it's just a reoccurring theme or something deeper, we can't help but wonder if there's more to Ansel's story than we've been told.
In The Assassin in the Desert, Ansel shares a really interesting story about an encounter with a witch. When she was 8, her sister and a friend snuck out of Briarcliff Hall to explore an abandoned watchtower. Quote, there was this archway that went through the bottom of the watchtower, so you could see through it to the other side of the hill. And one of the stable boys told my sister that if you look through the archway on the night of the summer solstice, then you might see into another world. That immediately stood out as a potential Maasverse connection. First, it once again confirms that in Throne of Glass, other realms and worlds exist, and more importantly, people know they exist. The idea of opening portals or gates between them isn't a myth or a fantasy to these characters. It's accepted knowledge. Let's talk about the archway itself. The way it's described, as a passage that on a specific night might show another world, sounds a lot like a word gate or a witch mirror. Word gates open directly to other realms. Witch mirrors have different uses. Some can show the future, the past, or even other worlds. So, is this archway actually a type of word gate, or is it something closer to a witch mirror, only active under specific conditions like the summer solstice, aka the longest day of the year? This immediately reminded us of another Maasverse item, the Ouroboros in ACOTAR. Quote, there was one mirror, the Ouroboros, she called it. It was old even when we were young, a window to the world. All could be seen, all could be told through its dark surface. That sounds so similar to Ansel's archway. Both are described as ways to see the world and possibly other worlds. Both exist outside the known portals and word gates. But here's where things get weird. Even though the Ouroboros is initially called a window to the world, it's never actually used that way in ACOTAR. When Farah tries to claim it, Kira tells her that everyone who has ever looked into it has gone insane. Later, the Suriel calls it the mirror of beginnings and endings and warns Farah that only she can decide what breaks her. And when she finally does look into it, she doesn't see other worlds. She doesn't see some great window to the universe. She sees herself, every part of herself, the good, the bad, the monstrous. So even though the Ouroboros is introduced as a window to the world, it turns out to be something completely different. Which makes us wonder, what exactly was the archway that Ansel described? Was it really a gate to another world, or was it something more like the Ouroboros, something that reveals what you need to see? Either way, the similarities are hard to ignore.
Honestly, The Assassin in the Desert is packed with possible Maasverse connections. One of the biggest ones, the spider silk merchant in Xandria. When Selena meets him, he tells her where he got his spider silk. Quote, in the depths of the Rune Mountains, everything is a labyrinth of mist and trees and shadows. So you don't find the Stygian spiders, they find you. This is a huge connection that so many people have tried to unravel. First, let's talk about the name, Rune Mountains. In Crescent City, we meet Rune Danon, the former crown prince of the Valbaran Fae. The difference? One letter. The Rune Mountains is spelled Ruhnn. Rune Danon spelled Ruhn. It's way too similar to ignore, but it's not just the name. The spider silk merchants describe the Rune Mountains as a labyrinth of mist, trees, and shadows. Rune's power? He literally wields shadows. Okay. And then there's the mist. We talked about this before. Mist in the Maasverse world often signals a thin place between the realms. The fact that the Rune Mountains, home to the Val-created Stygian spiders, are shrouded in mist, that can't be a coincidence since the spiders are created by Queen Maeve, a Val queen and a world walker.
And then we have an ACOTAR connection. When Bryce travels to Prithian in House of Sky and Breath, she immediately notices that Rune and Rhysand look almost identical. They also have similar abilities. Both have shadow powers, both have mind-related powers. And then in House of Flame and Shadow, we get confirmation that the Fae in Midgard and the Fae in Prithian are connected. From what we understand of the family tree, Bryce, Rune, and Rhysand are actually distant cousins / somehow distantly related. Bryce and Rune's ancestor is Helena. Rhysand's ancestor is Selene. Helena and Selene are sisters, and their mother is Thea. So when we look at the Rune Mountains, the mist, the shadows, the Valg, the Fae bloodlines, everything keeps circling back to the idea that these worlds are connected in ways we're only just starting to piece together. And if Rune, Rhysand, and Bryce all share a bloodline, then what exactly is the connection between the Rune Mountains and Throne of Glass and the shadows that cling to them?
Our last Maasverse connection in The Assassin in the Desert is small, but significant. When Ansel describes how Lord Locke took over Briarcliff, she says he demanded that they bow to him as High King of the Wastes. At first, this might not seem like a huge deal, but then we remember Brandon Galathinius, Aelin's ancestor, was also considered a High King. And this title, it definitely has a history across the Maasverse. It comes up again in ACOTAR and is actually one of the most talked about theories surrounding ACOTAR 6. In A Court of Silver Flames, after Nesta proves she can both track the Dread Trove and forge new made weapons, Amren drops a bombshell. She tells Rhysand, quote, with these 3 blades you can make yourself High King. And then, silence. Cassian blinks, slowly. Rhys, very tightly, responds, I don't wish to be High King. I only wish to be here, with my mate and my people. That reaction tells us that being High King isn't just about power. It comes with baggage. And when we look at the history of Prithian's only High King, it's very clear why. The first and the last High King of Prithian was Faya. In House of Flame and Shadow, we learned that he and Thea used the Dread Trove and the Cauldron to fight against the Asteri. But before Faya died, he refused to pass his throne to Thea. So what did Thea and Peleus do? They killed him. And that was the end of the High Kings in Prithian. So when Amren suggests that Rhys can make himself High King, it means something. It's not just about ruling. There's a history of betrayal, bloodshed, and power struggles tied to this title. And looking across the Maasverse, the term High King doesn't exactly have the best reputation. Brannon, his reign is legendary, but it's also the beginning of the end for a lot of things. His descendants are marked by the Nameless in My Price prophecy and are expected to sacrifice themselves to forge the lock and banish Erewhon. Vion, dead, betrayed, the only High King Prithian has ever seen. R.I.P. Lord Locke, just throwing that title around, trying to legitimize his rule over the waste. So, if ACOTAR 6 really does follow Rhys's path to becoming High King, it's not going to be an easy road. And based on everything we know, if he takes that title, it's going to cost him. Because in the Maasverse, being a High King never ends well.
We have one Maasverse connection for the assassin and the underworld, the fourth novella in The Assassin's Blade. At the beginning of this novella, we learn about a convoy coming in from Melisande, a kingdom famous for its tinkerers. Quote, Melisande was known for its tinkerers, for clever hands that created clever little devices. Clockwork so fine you could swear it was alive, musical instruments so clear and lovely they could shatter your heart, toys so charming you'd believe magic hadn't vanished from the continent. A master tinker from Melisande is actually the one who makes Selena and Sam's new assassin suits. The second we read this, alarm bells immediately went off, because ACOTAR has its own tinkerers. In the Dawn Court, we meet Nuan. Actually, I don't know how to say that. Nguan, Nuan, Lucian's friend, who is described as a skilled tinkerer. In ACOTAR, tinkering is referred to as, quote, blending magic and machinery. She's the one who creates Lucian's mechanical eye, a perfect example of that magic/tech combination. But the connections don't stop there. In ACOWAR, we get a very specific description of the tinkerers in the Dawn Court. Quote, there were other places within Dawn's territory, set in small cities that specialized in tinkering and clockwork and clever things. That description, almost identical to how Melisandre's tinkerers are described. Melisandre's tinkerers create clever little devices. Dawn Court tinkerers create clever things. Melisandre's tinkerers specialize in clockwork. Dawn Court tinkerers specialize in clockwork. So how are these tinkerers connected? And here's where things get even more interesting, because Nuan, the tinkerer from ACOTAR, is also the one who creates a Faebane immunity powder. Faebane, also known as Bloodbane, which just so happens to also exist in the Throne of Glass world. So now we have tinkerers in both worlds with nearly identical descriptions, a Dawn Court tinkerer creating something that affects Fae magic, and Fae/Bloodbane existing in both series. It does feel like these tinkerers are more than just a fun world-building detail. There's a connection there, maybe something deeper, something we haven't fully seen yet. And if Faebane exists across multiple realms, then who really made it? And why?
And now, our Maasverse connection for the last novella in The Assassin's Blade. In The Assassin in the Underworld, Selena is sentenced to Endovir by the king. We've touched on this before, but we've been tracking the word devour in our Throne of Glass deep dives because the power to devour is constantly linked to Valg power and the powers of other beings in the Maasverse. When Selena faces the king, this word is used to describe him, which tracks, since we know the king is Valg possessed. Quote, Selena raised her head and looked at the king of Adarlan. The blood drained from her face. Those black eyes were poised to devour the world. We covered this in the deep dives of our Crown of Midnight Maasverse Connections episode, but we'll give you the bullet points here. The word devoured is used in the Maasverse to describe the powers of several other beings. Kaltane, Rhysand, Amren, Truth Teller, which is Azrael's sword, the Star Sword, the Cauldron, Apollyon, and the Void. For us, tracking this word through the Maasverse has opened up questions about the true nature of power, darkness, and fate. What does it mean to have the power to devour? What implications does it have for characters like Rhys or Apollyon? At this point, this theory/connection needs its own episode, but we had to touch on it again since we do encounter the king and his power in this book.
And our last Maasverse connection for this episode is a small one, but it ties into a much bigger conversation in the fandom. It's a language parallel. In The Assassin in the Underworld, Erebin breaks into Selena's apartment, yet another attempt to control and intimidate her. And how does he greet her? Hello, darling. Now, if you've read ACOTAR, that phrase probably set off some alarm bells, because both Rhysand and Amarantha are known for using darling when speaking to Farah and other characters. There's actually a lot of debate about who says it first. In ACOTAR, Rhysand technically uses darling first in chapter 26, but it's in reference to the Lady of Autumn, not Farah. Amarantha uses it in chapter 34, but again, not in reference to Farah. The first time Farah is directly called Farah Darling is in chapter 38 by Rhysand. So why is this a Maasverse connection? Well, Arabin is one of the worst characters in Throne of Glass. He's manipulative, abusive, and power-hungry. And we already know that Amarantha is pure evil. So it's a little unsettling that both of these villains use the same condescending term of endearment. And there's the detail that both Arabin and Amarantha are redheads. Coincidence? Maybe. But this fandom never lets a red flag go unnoticed. Now, there's a lot of back and forth about what it means that Rhysand uses darling when Amarantha does too. Did she pick it up from him? Did he pick it up from her? And what does it mean that Rhys, one of the most beloved characters in ACOTAR, uses a term that's so strongly associated with two villains? We searched Crescent City and darling isn't used this way at all, so it doesn't seem to be like a universal Maasverse thing. At the end of the day, we don't think it's that deep, but since the fandom does, we had to include it. And who knows, we might find out it really is that deep in ACOTAR 6.
And that's our deep dive into the Maasverse connections in The Assassin's Blade. We love tracking the Maasverse connections and speculating about what it all means.
As mentioned on our socials, moving forward, we will be taking a break in between books. This means no new episode next Thursday. But you can join us next week on Tuesday for our quarterly reading wrap-up, where we yap about the books we read in January, February, and March. We'll start our Air of Fire deep dives on Thursday, April 3rd.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where our handle is @BookishRealmsPod.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode, so drop us a comment or send us a message. Also, leave us a rating if you like what you heard. It really helps us out.
Until then, keep reading, Assassins.
Bye!